Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 5th, 2025. President Donald Trump grants a one-month exemption on tariffs on automobile imports from Mexico and Canada to the Big Three U.S. car companies, Ford, GM, and Stellantis. House Republicans moved to censure Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas, after his extended protest during President Trump's speech to a joint session of Congress Tuesday night, a protest that got him removed from the chamber by the House Sergeant-at-Arms. Vice President JD Vance visits the U.S Mexico border in Texas, talking about the administration's border security and immigration policies. Democratic mayors of New York City, Chicago, Boston, and Denver testify in Washington before a House committee on their sanctuary city immigration policies. National Institutes of Health Director nominee Dr. Bhattacharya testifies before the Senate Health Committee on vaccines and autism and cuts to the NIH research budget. Plus an update from National Security Advisor Michael Waltz on when U.S. talks with Ukraine on ending the Russia-Ukraine war may resume. And new Congressman Sylvester Turner, Democrat from Texas, dies just a few months after taking the oath. CNBC writes the White House on Wednesday announced a one-month tariff exemption for automakers after President Donald Trump spoke a day earlier with heads of General Motors, Ford Motor, and Stellantis. Automakers have urged Trump to waive 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada on vehicles that comply with the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement's rules of origin. The exemption allows for additional preparation and discussion between the White House and automotive industry on tariffs. It also more closely aligns with potential vehicle tariffs on imports from outside of North America. That was the CNBC article. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made the announcement at the White House news conference.
Can you confirm that the President held talks with the Big Three automakers today, speaking about potentially delaying tariffs?
I can confirm, and I'm glad that you asked, because the President sent me out here with a statement directly from him on this. I saw it was reported earlier today by Bloomberg News, and he wanted me to share this with all of you. We spoke with the Big Three auto dealers. We are going to give a one-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA. Reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd. But at the request of the companies associated with USMCA, the President is giving them an exemption for 1 month so they are not at an economic disadvantage. So the three companies that he spoke to are Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors. They requested the call, they made the ask, and the President is happy to do it. It's a 1 month exemption.
The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. President Trump posting on his Truth Social account today, Justin Trudeau of Canada called me to ask what could be done about tariffs. I told him that many people have died from fentanyl that came through the borders of Canada and Mexico, and nothing has convinced me that has stopped. He said it's gotten better, but I said that's not good enough. The call ended in a somewhat friendly manner. He was unable to tell me when the Canadian election is taking place, which made me curious, like what's going on here. I then realized he is trying to use this issue to stay in power. Good luck, Justin. That was the post from President Trump. Forbes magazine writes that President Donald Trump acknowledged in his address to Congress Tuesday that his tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China will cause a little disturbance in the economy, but insisted that people will be okay, prompting several Democratic lawmakers to criticize the president and accuse him of downplaying people's economic gain. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about this.
Last night, President Trump said there will be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. Can you put a dollar figure amount on how much the average American family should expect to pay as this disturbance? And why should Americans be okay with that when so many are already struggling to pay the bills?
Well, first of all, last night, the President told the truth. And he was realistic, and he level set with the American people. And I think, frankly, it's very refreshing, and everybody in this room should be very grateful that we have a president who tells the truth about the reality of the economic situation that we are in, unlike the previous president who lied to everybody's faces, saying inflation was transitory, saying it was under control, saying that the border was secure, when none of that was true. So the president is being frank and honest, and the American people elected this president to have monumental reform and change, including rebuilding our manufacturing base in this country, standing up to foreign nations who have been ripping off our country for decades. And that requires a little bit of disruption. That requires a lot of effort and work that this president is focused on doing. With that said, as the president said last night, his administration is wholeheartedly committed, of course, course, to ending the inflation nightmare caused by the Biden administration. Look at the deregulation efforts. Look at the president's push last night in his speech for Congress to pass tax cuts, to end taxes on Social Security and overtime pay for hardworking Americans, end taxes on tips. We need Congress to get that done because that's going to put more money back into the pockets of the American people. And I didn't even mention energy. Look at the president's approach and focus on unleashing the might of our energy industry. We know that's the #1 driver of inflation. He's been slashing back a lot of the burdensome regulation from the previous administration to unleash our energy industry here at home, which will drive down costs. He said he is committed to making America affordable again. He did it in his first term, and Americans can trust him to do it again.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii, posted on X Tuesday night, "There will be a little disturbance" is a genuinely Soviet way to describe people not being able to afford their groceries. Also from the CNBC article, China has filed a revised request for consultations at the World Trade Organization over the additional 10% tariffs Trump has imposed, according to the international body. And the Chinese embassy in the U.S. said in a post on social media site X that if a war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. Reporting from CNBC. Wall Street today, the Dow up 485, NASDAQ up 267, S&P up 64. From ABC News, House Republicans are moving to censure Democratic Congressman Al Green after his disruptions during President Donald Trump's speech to a joint session of Congress Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, several members of the GOP conference have been circulating different resolutions to censure Green, who was ejected from the House chamber on Tuesday night after interrupting Trump's remarks multiple times. Congressman Dan Newhouse, Republican of Washington State, was the first to formally introduce a censure resolution on the House floor and spoke during the debate later on.
Decorum and order, respect, those are the foundations for the way that we conduct business in this chamber, in this institution. Respect for the institution is paramount. Respect for each other. And respect for the responsibility that each one of us has been given, has been tasked with, who has the responsibility to the American people. These are the building blocks, the most important facets of our system that truly separate us, the United States of America, from the rest of the world. During the President's address just last night to a joint session of Congress, Mr. Speaker, those principles were violated. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, performed one of the most shameful acts that I've ever seen on this floor.
Congressman Dan Newhouse, Republican from Washington State, on the House floor during debate on his censure resolution. The resolution introduced as privilege, which means the House needs to vote on it within 2 legislative days. A CBS News article reads that Congressman Al Green was quickly removed from the House chamber just minutes into Mr. Trump's speech after he stood and raised his cane in the president's direction and shouted. House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Louisiana Republican, warned Green to take his seat, maintain decorum, but the Texas Democrat continued. Johnson then directed the sergeant at arms to restore order and remove this gentleman from the chamber. That was from CBS. Congressman Green spoke to reporters outside the chamber Tuesday night.
Sir, what were you shouting to the president?
The president said he had a mandate. And I was making it clear to the president that he has no mandate to cut Medicaid. I have people who are very fearful. These are poor people, and they have only Medicaid in their lives when it comes to their health care. And I want him to know that his budget calls for deep cuts in Medicaid. He needs to save Medicaid, protect it. We need to raise the cap on Social Security. There's a possibility that it's going to be hurt, and we've got to protect Medicare. These are the safety net programs that people in my congressional district depend on. And this president seems to care less about them and more about the number of people that he can remove from the various programs that have been so helpful to so many people.
So is the yelling during his speech the best way to get that across?
It It is the best way to get it across to a person who uses his incivility against our civility. He is a person who has consistently been used incivility against civility.
Do you think it have no mandate? Is that what you said?
Well, look, I'm willing to suffer whatever punishment is available to me. I didn't say to anyone, don't punish me. I've said I'll accept the punishment, but it's worth it to let people know that there are some of us who are going to stand up against this president's desire to cut Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security.
Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas, speaking to reporters outside the House chamber Tuesday night. The House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, was on ABC News this morning, asked about Congressman Green's protest and what other Democrats did during the president's speech, some holding signs, others walking out, virtually all not applauding.
Were you comfortable with Al Green, Congressman Al Green, and his interrupting of the president and other moves you saw from Democrats yesterday? You heard Speaker Johnson there say the Democrats were not showing decorum.
Vast majority of Democrats showed restraint, listened to what the president had to say, and of course we strongly disagree. The biggest problem that I had with the speech is that there was nothing said, nothing laid out, nothing articulated by Donald Trump to meet the needs of the American people, particularly as it relates to the economy. Donald Trump promised to lower costs. In fact, he promised to lower costs on day one. We know that grocery prices aren't going down, they're going up. Inflation is going up, and the stock market is going down, which is hurting the retirement security of everyday Americans.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, on ABC News this morning. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also spoke about congressional Democrats' reactions during President Trump's speech Tuesday night.
And as President Trump asked in his speech last night, how could anyone possibly be opposed to any of this action that he is taking? Well, apparently, the modern-day Democrat Party could. The behavior of Democrats last night was completely disgraceful and demonstrated how severely out of touch they are with the American public. It was the most shameful moment in the history of presidential addresses in that beautiful chamber. In what was supposed to be a unifying moment for our country, Democrat members of Congress instead screamed at the President of the United States, who was just overwhelmingly reelected by their constituents, walked out of the chamber, and worst of all, they disrespected the American people. Democrats didn't stand to keep men out of women's sports. They couldn't even clap for a girl who got her head smashed in by a man on a volleyball court. Democrats didn't stand for an innocent and beautiful child who is surviving brain cancer. They opposed eliminating taxes on tips and Social Security. They didn't stand in favor of cutting taxes for hardworking Americans. They couldn't even clap for two mothers whose daughters were killed by illegal aliens. One of the only things that could get Democrats off their feet last night was cheering for Ukraine, not for America. Last night was a very clarifying moment for our country. The Democrats exposed themselves as the party of insanity and hate, the party that wants to put America last. They've allowed their Trump derangement syndrome to stop them from celebrating America and our people, and we will not allow them to forget that.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. This is Washington Today. Vice President JD Vance visited Eagle Pass, Texas today on the U.S. Mexico border, along with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, to discuss the Trump administration's border security and immigration policies, which the president spoke about extensively in his Tuesday night speech to a joint session of Congress. Texas Public Radio writes the border city had been at the center of the fight between the Biden administration and the state of Texas over immigration enforcement. It was also a hotspot for illegal crossings at the end of 2023, but has since seen much fewer migrant encounters over the past year. The vice president got an aerial tour of the city and then visited an immigration processing center and then spoke at Shelby Park, a public park on the banks of the Rio Grande that has been seized by Texas.
I have some bad news and some good news. And the bad news is that because of what Joe Biden did at the southern border for 4 years, we had record increases in migrant crime, in fentanyl deaths, and in just floods and floods of people who shouldn't be in our country who came into the United States of America. We also have a number of ways in which the cartels became more advanced, better war fighters because Joe Biden opened up the American southern border and allowed the cartels to turn it into their playground. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is, as President Trump said last night at the State of the Union, it turns out we didn't need new laws. We didn't need fancy legislation. We just needed a new president of the United States, and thank God that's exactly what we have. And I will say that the most heartening message that I take away from my visit here at the Texas border is the number of Border Patrol agents who have come up to me and said thank you, or said because of this, we've cut the number of border crossings from 1,500 a day to 30 a day. Or the people who have come up and said we've seen a reduction, an 85% of the number of people who are dying at the American southern border. And every single day that we continue to keep this border safe, that means less migrant crime, that means less fentanyl coming into our communities, that means more safety and security for the people of the United States of America. And of course, we know the border problem, the border crisis under Biden's administration was a national crisis, but it acutely affected the communities right here. And I've already heard heartbreaking stories of people who are still picking up the pieces, local mayors who are still dealing with the budgetary consequences of what the Joe Biden administration allowed to happen at the American southern border. And that, too, is something that President Trump is going to help address, help fix, and help solve.
Vice President JD Vance in Eagle Pass, Texas. A visit along with the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. Back in Washington, the Democratic mayors of 4 large U.S. cities, New York City, Chicago, Boston, and Denver, testified before the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee about their immigration policies. A CBS News article reads, "Each leads a sanctuary city," the term for policies that limit local cooperation with federal immigration agents. The mayors argued the policies are crucial for ensuring undocumented immigrants report crimes and access city services without fear of deportation. Republicans accused the mayors of defying President Trump's immigration agenda and releasing dangerous criminals onto the streets. That was from CBS News. Here's part of the hearing. The committee chair, James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, questioning Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson.
Last year, in a Boston suburb, an illegal alien raped and impregnated his 14-year-old daughter while living in a shelter for illegal aliens. Mayor Wu, under Boston law, would you turn this criminal over to ICE on a detainer?
Whenever there's a criminal warrant, Boston police enforce that and hold people accountable.
So would you turn that criminal over to ICE?
This happened outside the city of Boston, but I can tell you in the city, whenever someone commits a crime, whenever there's a criminal warrant, we hold them accountable. If ICE deems that they are dangerous enough to obtain a criminal warrant, and the Boston police will enforce it.
Will you turn that criminal over to ICE?
We follow the laws, and we make sure that everyone...
In Chicago, an illegal alien who is a suspected member of a violent foreign gang who was brought into custody for his potential involvement in a murder. He was released when Cook County declined to press charges. This illegal alien is also facing charges for kidnapping and sexually assaulting his former girlfriend last year. Now he's on the streets. Mayor Johnson, under Chicago law, would you turn this criminal over to ICE on a detainer?
Our local law enforcement works hard every day to get criminals off the streets of Chicago.
Would you turn that criminal over to ICE? That's the problem. That's one of the topics of this conversation. That's one of the problems we've heard from Tom Hammond and from the Homeland Security, is that in your cities, when someone's apprehended for a crime, and ICE is now, with this new federal policy, wanting to come in and deport the criminal alien, that you will not cooperate with ICE. Will you turn that criminal over to ICE?
And we do not harbor criminals. Our local police department works hard every single day to ensure that the city of Chicago is
safe. Yes or no? Will you turn the criminal over to ICE?
With a criminal warrant from the federal government, our local law enforcement repeatedly collaborates with federal agents.
So you're saying publicly today, you will turn that alien over to ICE in a safe place like a jail, and not turn him out on the street and say, here you go, ICE, good luck. You will turn that criminal over to ICE.
with a criminal warrant, as we have done for 40 years.
Should that criminal be turned over to ICE?
With a criminal warrant, they are subject to the federal laws, and that includes deportation.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, a Democrat, answering a question from Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight Committee. You also heard from another witness, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, also a Democrat. Congressman Gerald Connolly of Virginia is the committee's ranking Democrat. He asked Mayor Wu and another witness, Denver Mayor Michael Johnston, Democrat, about whether there's a link between immigration and crime.
Mayor Wu, I quoted Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, saying that he wanted to bring hell. He was bringing hell to the city of Boston. What did you understand him to mean by that?
Let's talk about Tom Homan. Shame on him for lying about my city, for having the nerve to insult our police commissioner who has overseen the safest Boston's been in anyone's lifetime. Bring him here under oath, and let's ask him some questions. I am here to make sure that the city of Boston is safe. Others may want to bring hell. We are here to bring peace to cities everywhere.
Mayor Johnston of Denver, what would your reaction be if Tom Homan wants to bring hell to your city, Denver?
We think that we have folks in Denver who are working hard, playing by the rules, paying taxes. There is no one that is seeking hell to come to Denver. What people are looking for is opportunity and hope.
And for the record, he can do whatever he wants to do, I guess. But the fact of the matter is you absorbed on a per capita basis the largest immigration a year or two ago, and you indicated that your crime rate actually fell. It didn't increase. Is that correct?
That is correct. Crime is down in Denver. We have homicides down 17%. Violent shootings are down 24%.
And in Boston, I'm sorry, I've got limited time. Mayor Wu, same thing in Boston. The Boston crime rate has been falling, correct?
We had 24 homicides last year, 24 too many, but that represented a tremendous reduction, one of the biggest drops anywhere in the country.
Thank you. So the correlation between immigration and crime is false, as you point out, Mr. Beer. Perhaps you can elaborate that. I find it ironic that you characterized correctly, in my view, President Trump and Tom Homan's approach to immigration as lawless when they're invoking law and order and crime as the rationale for their lawlessness. Could you expand on the lawlessness and the irony of the fact that, as you point out in your testimony, the crime rate among immigrants is half that of the native population?
That's Congressman Gerald Connolly of Virginia, Oversight Committee's ranking Democrat, questioning witnesses Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and Denver Mayor Michael Johnston. The congressman referring to another witness at the end, the Cato Institute Immigration Studies Director. At another point in the hearing, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts, and Committee Chair James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, got into a heated exchange while she was trying to enter articles into the official committee record.
Chair recognizes
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request. Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Proceed.
I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, and I'll do this as a survivor of sexual violence myself. This is from Courts, March 2018.
Without objection, so ordered.
Data from Texas shows that U.S. born
Without objection, so ordered. We've put it in the record.
I haven't entered it.
You have what?
Mr. Chair, can I have several articles. I need to enter them. Let me just go ahead with what the articles are, what they speak to.
What's the next article?
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans commit more rape and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you all trying to get thrown out of committee so you can get on MSNBC is going to end. We're not going to put up with it.
This is my procedural right as a member of this committee
you can go with Mr. Frost and Mr. Green.
I'm reclaiming my time.
That's what you want. No. Ms. Presley, I have been very accommodating to you. Mr. Subrajam,
and I take particular umbrage as a survivor of sexual violence. I will enter into the record. This is my right. Thank you.
No. It is Mr. Subramaniam.
Mr. Chair?
No, you know the process of unanimous consent. You've You are not
I have
recognized.
several articles to enter into the record.
Mr. Subrignon, if you don't go, we're going to recognize Mr. Timmons.
Exchange between Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Democrat of Massachusetts, and the Oversight Committee Chair, Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, at today's hearing on immigration and border security and sanctuary city policies. TheHill.com writing about another point in the hearing. Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, called on New York City Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, to resign on Wednesday following the Department of Justice's move to drop federal corruption charges against him. Garcia told Adams, "I personally agree with the majority of New Yorkers and think, Mr. Mayor, that you should resign. We have a right to know if the Trump administration has coerced you into agreeing to anything. Are you selling out New Yorkers to save yourself from prosecution?" The article says Adams denied taking part in any quid pro quo. You can find the full hearing, the video of it, at our video library at cspan.org. This is Washington Today. Washington Post reporting on another hearing that C-SPAN covered. Bhattacharya began his Senate confirmation hearing as President Donald Trump's nominee to direct the National Institutes of Health by pledging to restore public trust in science and medicine, supporting free and open discussion, and stressing that scientists demonstrate that their findings are reliable and can be repeated. The controversial Stanford University doctor and economist, who had emerged as an early critic of COVID-19 stay-at-home restrictions, also said he was convinced that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine does not cause autism. And he said he was committed to focusing research on chronic diseases such as obesity, Alzheimer's, and cancer. The nominee testified before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Chair Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, asked him about vaccines and autism.
I've been told that you have said that we need to invest NIH resources at looking at the link, a possible link between measles vaccine and autism. I've not heard that directly. It's hearsay. Any comment on that?
Senator, it's a tragedy that a child would die from a vaccine-preventable disease. I fully support children being vaccinated for diseases like measles that can be prevented with the vaccination efforts. As far as research on autism and vaccines, I don't generally believe that there is a link, and based on my reading of the literature. But what I have seen is that there's tremendous distrust in medicine and science coming out of the pandemic. And we do have, as you know, Senator, a sharp rise in autism rates in this country. And I don't know, and I don't think any scientist really knows the cause of it. So I would support an agenda of a broad scientific agenda based on data to get an answer to that.
But this has been fairly well, in fact, it's been exhaustively studied. And there's limited resources. And if we keep plowing over ground that has been plowed over, knowing you can never prove a negative, and since we don't know the cause, we'll still have a problem. We've got a responsibility with limited resources. How do we address those things that we don't know the cause for, or that can ameliorate those things that are related to this crisis of chronic disease? My state, by the way, is terribly affected by chronic disease, so I'm totally with you on that. But what I want to make sure is there's an appropriate use. So again, just going back to, do you have an idea or an agenda that would once more, by golly, once more, prove that measles vaccine is not associated with autism, neither the schedule, the vaccine, or anything else associated with it? Because my concern is the more we pretend like this is an issue, the more we will have children dying from vaccine-preventable diseads.
Senator, I guess I've turned it around and say don't want to disprove a negative. That's impossible, really. But I want to address the rise in autism that we have seen.
I accept that. I think that's laudable.
Yeah.
We need to do that.
Yeah, that's a positive.
But I'm asking the specific question: will we once more have to go back over this particular issue, because that has been exhaustively studied?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, Senator, I don't think that there's a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. I'm convinced based on that literature. The only reason I'm not wholeheartedly saying yes to your question, which every instinct of mine is to do that, is that there are people who might disagree with me. I want to make sure.
But that's life.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who disagree that the world is round.
That's true.
And I say that not to minimize these concerns, but people still think Elvis is alive.
Senator and Dr. Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, questioning Dr. Bhattacharya, nominated for director of the National Institutes of Health. Washington Post article continues, if confirmed later by vote of the full Senate, Bhattacharya would helm a $48 billion arm of Health and Human Services that serves as the world's largest public funder of biomedical research. He would oversee an entity of 27 institutes and centers that employs about 20,000 people, including renowned scientists driving research and discovery. That was from the Washington Post. More from the hearing, Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat of Minnesota, asking about budget cuts.
So I want to begin by discussing the Trump administration's actions to halt thousands of NIH grants and billions of dollars in NIH research funding. So canceled study sections and, importantly, advisory council meetings mean that NIH cannot award grants to fund critical medical research. Additionally, the administration attempted to illegally cap indirect costs. You've already gotten several questions about that. The indirect cost rates, and this is in blatant defiance of appropriations law, which prohibits NIH from capping these costs. I'm the ranking member of the Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee, and I've been raising the alarm about this for weeks now. On Monday, I revealed that the Trump administration has halted $65 million in funding for Alzheimer's disease, stopping 14 Alzheimer's disease research centers from finding ways to treat and prevent this devastating disease. If NIH does not reverse course on these really disastrous decisions, the centers will run out of funding at the end of April. So, Dr. Bhattacharya, do you agree with President Trump that NIH should stop funding for research on cancer and Alzheimer's disease?
Senator, I don't believe President Trump has that as a priority. And I, of course, I was not.
Actions are accomplishing that right now.
Senator, if confirmed, I will follow the law, as I said to Senator Collins, on the indirect cost recovery. And my commitment is to make sure that every single researcher at the NIH, every single researcher supported by NIH money has the resources they need to do their life-saving research.
We're going to talk more about those researchers who've been fired, but right now, this administration has halted funding for 14 Alzheimer's disease research centers. Do you agree with that decision?
Senator, I don't have access to that information from outside. If confirmed, I absolutely will look into it to make sure that
I know that you're not consulting with people at NIH pending your confirmation proceedings here, but you're not unaware that this is happening, and you should have a position on this. I mean, you've accepted President Trump's nomination, and you're watching these actions taking place in an organization that you may someday lead. Do you agree with the stripping away of funding this for cancer and Alzheimer's disease?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I will make sure that the NIH researchers and the NIH researchers that's funded by the NIH, outside the NIH, have the resources they need to make sure that they do their research. That's the mission of the NIH. If I'm confirmed, that my job will be to make sure that mission is met.
Dr. J. Bhattacharya, nominated for NIH Director, question by Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat of Minnesota, at today's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee confirmation hearing. New York Times writes that Dr. Bhattacharya burst into the news at the height of the pandemic in October 2020 when he co-wrote an anti-lockdown treatise, the Great Barrington Declaration, that argued for focused protection, a strategy that would focus on protecting the elderly and vulnerable while letting the virus spread among younger, healthier people. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN Now is a free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in Washington, live and on demand. Keep up with the day's biggest events with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more from the world of politics, all at your fingertips. You can also stay current with the latest episodes of Washington Journal and find scheduling information for C-SPAN's TV networks and C-SPAN Radio, plus a variety of compelling podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play, or visit our website, cspan.org/cspan now. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. CNN writes that a divided Supreme Court on Wednesday rejected the Trump administration's request to keep billions of dollars in foreign aid approved by Congress frozen. However, the court did not immediately say when the money must be released, allowing the White House to continue to dispute the issue in lower courts. The ruling was 5-4. The order was unsigned, but 4 conservative justices dissented: Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. That was from CNN. There are dozens of lawsuits making their way through the courts challenging President Trump's executive orders. Today on the Senate floor, Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, asked that a resolution be passed stating that the court's rulings should be followed.
More than 60 years ago, President John Kennedy spoke about the importance of the rule of law in a speech at Vanderbilt University. As President Kennedy put it, and I quote, "For one man to defy a law or court order he does not like is to invite others to defy those which they do not like, leading to a breakdown of all justice and all order. We cannot allow any administration to defy a court order, period. And we cannot stand idly by as the president and his allies undermine the judiciary by attacking judges. That's why I introduced the resolution we are considering today. I want to thank my colleagues who co-sponsored it and are joining on the floor in this block of time. Our resolution simply affirms that the Constitution vests the judicial power in the federal courts, and it affirms that both the Constitution and established precedent require the executive branch to comply with all federal court rulings. These are not partisan talking points. They are basic principles of constitutional law, so fundamental and so essential to our constitutional order that it should go without saying. But in light of recent comments and actions by President Trump, Vice President Vance, and his administration and allies, some things must be said. So I ask my colleagues to say with one clear voice, the United States Senate supports the Constitution, the judicial branch, and the rule of law. Every member of this body has sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I urge my colleagues to fulfill their oaths today.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, today on the Senate floor. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, the committee chair, objected to the unanimous consent request to pass this resolution.
Although I fully agree that Congress stands for the rule of law, this resolution is nothing but a partisan messaging statement. President Trump has been clear on this. Just a few weeks ago, he said, quote, "I'll always abide by the courts, and then I'll have to appeal. The answer is, I always abide by the courts," end of quote. There have been numerous extreme orders from various district courts improperly encroaching on core Article 2 of powers. President Trump and his administration have worked diligently to abide by those orders, no matter how outrageous, by appealing them and challenging their scope and reach. He is completely within his right to do so, and his conduct is appropriate and legitimate. Our constitutional system has a robust system of checks and balances. The executive branch must abide by the courts, and the courts must also ensure that their rulings are respectful of jurisdictional limits, and particularly our famous separation of powers. Some of the recent orders of individual district judges issued on an expedited basis with nationwide very broad nationwide impact have concerned me. I think Congress needs to examine this issue closely.
Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, chair of the Judiciary Committee on the Senate floor. He also, in his speech, pointed to examples, he said, of Democrats disparaging the Supreme Court after rulings they disagreed with, and actions by former President Joe Biden ignoring or trying to get around court decisions. The Senate today also confirmed Todd Blanche to be Deputy Attorney General. It was along party lines, 52-46. From Associated Press, the U.S. has paused its intelligence sharing with Ukraine, cutting off the flow of vital information that has helped the war-torn nation target Russian invaders. But Trump administration officials said Wednesday that positive talks between Washington and Kyiv mean it may only be a short suspension. That was from AP. The White House National Security Advisor Michael Waltz spoke to reporters in the White House driveway.
Did the U.S. pause intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and is it still paused right now?
We have taken a step back and are pausing and reviewing all aspects of this relationship. But I just got off the phone before I walked out here with my counterpart, the Ukrainian National Security Advisor. We are having good talks on a location for the next round of negotiations, on delegations, on substance. So just in the last 24 hours since the public statement from Zelensky and then these subsequent conversations, which I'm going to walk inside and continue, I think we're going to see movement in very short order.
On NATO, do you think the U.S. would ever relinquish leadership in NATO as you move to having Europeans take control?
Relinquish leadership in NATO?
Not having
No, there's two different things. The U.S. supports our NATO allies. We support Article 5. It is notable that our defense budget is nearly double all of the other NATO members combined. So we still need to see that movement. I know a lot of people make, kind of hay over the 5%, yet ours is 3%. Well, they need makeup money. They have a long and decades-long hole to dig out of. That's very different than the U.S. committing to militarily support U.S. troops in a non-NATO country. For example, the French had troops in Mali. We didn't have an Article 5 commitment if those troops were attacked in Mali, nor are we looking to have that type of commitment to any European troops deployed to Ukraine. That doesn't mean that we're going to not have supporting efforts or things need to be negotiated. Our point to President Zelensky is, you don't negotiate all of those details before we even know if we can get both sides to the table. I think we've seen movement in the last 24 hours. That the Ukrainian side will actually come to the table and negotiate a partial truce, a full truce, and then a permanent peace.
National Security Advisor Michael Waltz speaking to reporters in the White House driveway. The CIA Director John Ratcliffe, in an interview on Fox Business, also suggesting the pause on intelligence sharing may soon end. He said, "You saw the response that President Zelensky put out. So I think on the military front and the intelligence front, the pause that allowed that to happen, I think it will go away." And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his evening online address, the first results of ongoing negotiations would be announced next week. He said everyone can see how fast diplomatic events are developing. Our Ukrainian and U.S. teams have started working on a meeting. There is positive movement. U.S. policy on the war in Ukraine also came up today during Prime Minister's question time in the British House of Commons. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, questioned by Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party.
The objective for his visit to Washington was to get that U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine, and I commend his efforts in this very difficult task. But nonetheless, on Monday, the United States withdrew military aid for Ukraine. Can he update the House on the steps he is taking to persuade America that it is also in their national interest to provide a security guarantee?
Prime Minister.
I'm pleased to inform the House that on Thursday of last week we did discuss security guarantees. The President made absolutely clear his commitment to Article 5 of NATO, absolutely clear that he would have our backs because of the relationship between our parties, and agreed that our teams would sit down together to talk through security guarantees. I've spoken to him, I think, 3 times since then on the telephone, because it is vitally important that we work with the US, with Europe and Ukraine and make sure that if there is a deal, it has proper security guarantees in place.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is not able to comment on specific intelligence matters, and I'm certainly not asking him to do that. However, there are concerning reports that the United States has instructed Britain to suspend intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and other reports that Five Eyes itself may be at risk. We need to make sure America does not disengage. There are some in this House who argue Europe should go it alone. But does he agree with me that without this country's greatest ally, any peace agreement would place a terrible burden on Britain and our taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, I do agree with her wholeheartedly, and that's why in the debate we had just 2 days ago, I've always been clear that we need to ensure that the US, the UK, Europe and Ukraine are working together, but we must not choose between the US and Europe. We never have historically, and we're not going to do so now.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, questioned by the opposition leader Kemi Badenoch today in the House of Commons in London. NBC News reports that President Emmanuel Macron said in a primetime address to France on Wednesday night that Europe must be prepared to go it alone in defending Ukraine without further assistance from the United States under the Trump administration. Article says the French president made clear that France and other European countries must take concrete steps, including investing in defense and military capabilities to protect the security of their nations and Ukraine's. Here's a portion of the speech.
We need to come up with a long-term peace plan, one that we can continue to change. This is what we have prepared with a number of European partners and Ukraine. This is what I went to present to the United States just a few days ago. And I want to believe that the United States will stay by our side, but they will need to be... But we need to be ready if that were not the case. Whether we come to peace now or in a somewhat distant future, Europe needs to be able to better defend itself and to deter other forms of invasion. Whatever the case may be, we need to arm ourselves more. We need to bolster our defense positions. We need to deter. And that is why we uphold NATO and our partnership with the United States of America. But we need more. We need to reinforce our own defense and security capabilities. The future of Europe is not going to be decided by Russia or by Washington.
The French President Emmanuel Macron through an interpreter televised address to the people of France. And finally, on Washington today, the story from the Texas Tribune, U.S. Congressman Sylvester Turner, a former Houston mayor, state legislator, and institution in Houston Democratic politics, died Tuesday evening. He was 70. Turner's death comes 2 months into his first term representing Texas' 18th congressional district, the seat long occupied by his political ally, former Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who also died in office last year amid a battle with pancreatic cancer. Turner said in 2022 that he had secretly been recovering from bone cancer last summer as he was seeking the nomination for Jackson Lee's seat. Turner said he was now cancer-free. That was from the Texas Tribune. C-SPAN interviewed Congressman Turner last week as part of our series of interviews with new members of Congress.
I come prepared to give this place 100% to represent them and build on the legacy of my parents. Neither one of them graduated from high school. Neither one. My dad died of cancer when I was 13. My mom was a maid at the Rice Hotel downtown and reared 9 kids. But what I focus on, my dad died of cancer because we didn't have private health insurance. And he made the decision. He wasn't going to take from his children. He was going to work until the good Lord called him home. Fast forward, as mayor, his son was diagnosed with cancer. I had access to the best health care in the world, the best doctors in the world, treated at MD Anderson. And 3 weeks after my surgery, I'm back at City Hall as mayor, and now I find myself here in the halls of Congress representing the people in the 18th. A dad who died far too soon because he didn't have health care. His son, some years later, has the best you can get. and now my life continues, and I'm in Congress. For me, a driving force is to represent those people who don't have it, where the fact that they don't should not be a death sentence for them.
Part of C-SPAN's recent interview with new member of Congress Sylvester Turner, Democrat from Texas, who died Tuesday night at the age of 70. A statement from Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, Democrat of Texas, reads in part, "I'm heartbroken and devastated by the loss of this exceptional Houstonian, an exceptional human being. He personified what it means to be a Houstonian, to believe in possibility, to work for it, and to share it with others. In his presence, you could always feel the love of the city that we call home and for all the people who live here." And from the Texas Tribune article, Governor Greg Abbott can call a special election to fill Turner's congressional seat for the rest of his term. State law does not specify a deadline to call a special election, but if it's called, the election is required to happen within 2 months of the announcement. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. to across the country. Coming up Thursday morning, we'll talk with Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett about next week's federal spending deadline, Ukraine, and the House Republican strategy to advance President Trump's legislative agenda. And then we'll continue the conversation with Rhode Island Democrat Congressman Gabe Amo, a member of the Budget Committee, as we discuss next week's federal spending deadline and the Trump administration's recent actions. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Thursday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.